Good morning, everyone. Bon matin. Welcome to this first webinar of 2022 on behalf of the France-Ireland Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to welcome you all, many of you members of the Chamber, and many of you have joined us because of your interest in the topic of Brexit, including some colleagues from France related to the French Chambers in France. So you're all very welcome. And my name is Queally McGann. I'm the Director of the France-Ireland Chamber of Commerce. And the topic for this morning is we're going to look at the impact of Brexit and look at it, the human impact. How is Brexit 1 year on affecting the consumer, the person who has ordered something online and has to deal with delivery delays, perhaps extra costs, perhaps unknowns related to getting deliveries from the UK and vice versa. So today, just before we start, we will have a discussion led by Chris Smyth. And then after the discussion, we'll invite you to pose your questions. So you'll see there's a Q&A, a chat button down at the bottom of the screen. So if you could use that chat button to pose your questions, we'll do our best to get to them towards the end of the session. And now I'd like to introduce Chris Smyth, who is going to moderate our panel of speakers and introduce our speakers for you. And Chris is actually CEO of Perennial Freight. And Perennial Freight is one of the largest Irish-owned transport companies. And Perennial Freight offers roll-on, roll-on and load-on, load-off services to all over Europe, moving over 35,000 full loads per annum. So Chris has full responsibility for the company, including the strategic direction of the company, and they have had rapid growth in the last few years. So Chris is in a very good place to talk about the whole topic of Brexit. And Chris, you were one of our speakers this time last year when we first entered the Brexit era. And Chris is also a director on the council. Perennial Freight became patrons of the France-Ireland Chamber of Commerce in February 2019, and so Chris has been very active as a participant, helping with the strategy and the direction of the Chamber. So Chris, thank you for joining us, and I'll ask you to introduce us to the panel of speakers and to the topic of today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Thank you. Welcome everybody to the human aspect of the impact of Brexit. Delighted that we have some great panelists this morning joining us, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what they have to say. First, we have Simon McKeever, is the Chief Executive of the Irish Exporters Association, having held this position since 2013. Simon leads the association's work on several policy areas, including COVID-19, Brexit, market diversification, sustainable trade, investment and trade compliance. The IAE's participation on a number of government stakeholder groups and EU forums is driven by Simon on behalf of the IEA's broad membership base, which includes companies across the international trade industry. The broad membership base well placed at the IEA as the key interlocutor in the supply chain. Prior to Simon joining his current position as Chief Executive, he spent 3 years as Director of Trade and Investment at the British Embassy in Dublin, which placed him at the forefront of a joint trade strategy between Ireland and the UK, where he developed a close working relationship between the UK Trade and Investment and Enterprise Ireland. Simon was the driving force behind the creation of the British-Irish Chamber of Commerce, and his leadership on the Agri agenda created a joint initiative that has kicked off the first Irish-British Food Business and Innovation Summit in Dublin. Simon, very welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. Really looking forward to hearing your comments from your clients in the Irish Export Association. So thank you for joining us. Next up, we have Jen Maiers. Jennifer is International Trade and Logistics Manager for DPD Ireland. It is her team who ensures that DPD Ireland customers' parcels are imported and exported correctly and expediently. She spent the last 4 years immersed in all things Brexit and customs and ensuring DPD Ireland was ready for the sea change that Brexit would incur. Prior to 2018, before she took over as Brexit project manager, she was working as the International Service Manager for DPD Ireland. Jennifer has been with DPD Ireland for almost 17 years, and she's had a number of roles within that time. But the past 3 years have been the most challenging, but also the most rewarding. Jennifer, thank you. I'm really looking forward to listening to you because everybody knows there's a DPD van on our street every day, so you're going to have lots of things to tell us about the
Absolutely, Chris. Absolutely.
Really looking forward to what you to say. And lastly, we've Jamie Queally. Is the key account manager of Irish Dog Foods. He has been working with Irish Dog Foods for over 15 years with extensive experience in both purchasing, procurement and international sales. Currently, key account manager are two of their largest customers, which account for sales across the UK and Europe, worth over 14 million. Jamie was also project leader for the Brexit readiness team in Irish Dog Foods. Irish Dog Foods is part of the Queally Group, which is one of Ireland's largest privately owned agri-businesses. Its businesses include meat processing, trading and distribution. It is also involved in production of a range of food and beverage products, the manufacture and distribution of pet foods, commercial property development, a drinks plastic manufacturing arm, and a water distribution company based in Spain. Queally Group owns a number of well-known brands such as Dawn Meats, Hip and Pear, Irish Dog Foods, Glen Patrick Spring Water, and also operates a number of joint ventures with companies such as Dunbee, Red Nut, and Shannon Meats. Jamie, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
No problem.
You come from a very big company there. It's got lots of customers and lots of consumers as well. So I'm really interested to hear what you're going to tell us today as well.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So let's kick off. And I suppose, Simon, I'll go to you first. So what changes have you seen in consumer trends since 2021?
Thanks, Chris, and good morning, everybody. And apologies in advance for the length of my bio. I didn't write it, so I am very sorry. I just texted one of my colleagues to produce a much shorter one. So I suppose we're a B2B organization. So what changes have we? Well, I suppose a couple of things, because we look at the kind of customs applications and we also look at the routing. I suppose for us, one of the things that we've noticed, or the story of Brexit, was the, complete madness this time last year. So from January, right? I for some day I have February the 9th is the date where actually the pressure started to come off a little bit, but it was really crazy in the first couple of months of last year. We did have a lot of issues on the inbound in particular side of things, not necessarily on the outbound so much, but on the inbound it was totally crazy. And we had seen from I'd say the end of November, particularly when the all those issues in Dover happened, we saw a lot of the big companies based in Ireland, particularly the American ones, taking the lead and going, we're going to go direct to France. So that was the kind of and from the continent. So that was the biggest thing that we saw. We then, I suppose, as the year has kind of progressed and companies got used to dealing with, in particularly the customs and then the kind of transit piece. And funny enough, we just had two of our network meetings, one in the south and one in the north, in the Midlands area, border Midlands. And when the question about Brexit came up, the answer that was kind of a consensus around the table was that unless you're a food company dealing with a lot of the complexities and the paperwork of Brexit has become par for the course now, it's a natural thing that they do in their business. I don't fully agree with that, because we're still seeing a massive demand for all our training courses in customs. And what we noticed going back to last year was the we had to introduce a very, very basic training course in January last year, which is still there, which is what goes into what box of the SAD. So we actually had to go back to that level, which was even at a more basic level than the training we have been providing through the government. So we have seen a big movement away from the UK as a source of supply for a lot of companies. We are seeing a lot more business being done with Germany in the EU. I think there is a big opportunity to do more business with France, but I'm not quite sure why that isn't happening more, because it's a natural route for us and it makes an awful lot of sense. I think companies are kind of getting on with things. What I'm slightly disappointed about, I have to say, is that, as a nation, we are still very UK, US centric as countries that we want to trade with, and we should be doing so much more business with the EU, and we're not. And I don't know whether that's language or because of customs or what it is, but we just seem to have a difficulty doing business in those countries. Now, it is growing, but I would like to see more done. I can share a very personal insight into the difficulties of Brexit if you really want, Chris, because it is. I'm sure Jennifer would. I'll take 10 seconds. I have an old car. I was buying a part for it. I was buying a roof for this old car that I have, and I think this is where we are in La La Land, or in Brexit land in the UK, which is that I was buying this part of a small engineering company in the Midlands. It took me 6 weeks to convince them that they actually needed to get up off their backside and do some work. They just, they just don't have any notion in general over there that things have changed. And I think a lot of the difficulties that we're seeing here and did see here last year, and that we continue to see, and in particular in trading into the north, is actually the lack of preparation within the companies in the UK. The UK has a massive internal market. You really only have about 10% of the companies over there that export in any general basis. And so because the message hasn't come from on top that they need to get ready for it, I spent 3 weeks talking to this guy who was selling me this part. It was only when his wife saw that the roof was still in the warehouse, she rang me up and she said, "I thought you'd bought this thing, what's happening?" And I said, "Well, I can't convince your husband to get an EORI for him." And she said, "Oh, my son has another business, let me talk to him." She rang me later on that afternoon. She said, "We'll sort this for you tomorrow." And then it took me 3 weeks to go, this goes in that box, this goes in that box. And I think that's where we're at with them. But I'm sure that kind of speaks to what Jennifer is going to say in terms of it's.
Absolutely, yeah. It's you're right. The Q1 was definitely a lot of issues there. And Jen, I mean, I know from your point of view, DPD, your business exploded in Q1, certainly, and all the way through last year and into this year. So, what changes have you seen for the consumer? What trends have DPD seen out there now with clients and the person on the street?
Well, absolutely. I mean, Simon, you're absolutely right. The January was just a nightmare. Between a lot of UK customers, as you say, Simon, just didn't have the data to ready and able to give it to our counterparts in the UK, DPD UK, and the way we developed our business, for Brexit, everything is data driven. Data is the key for us, and if the customer or the sender in the UK doesn't give us that data, then the parcel can't move. The UK can't do their bit and we can't do our bit. So that was the biggest issue. Also for our Irish customers in January, a lot of them, I've had customers still to this day tell me, we didn't think Brexit would really happen. And so when it did, it was quite a shock. Then it was a shock then as well, all of the things that were needed to move a parcel. So, I think for what the consumer has seen is, or at least what we're seeing, is I've seen the consumer get a lot savvier, right? I think the first quarter of last year, there was still a lot of I'll buy from the UK because I'm used to it. I've always bought from this particular shop in the UK. And now I think customers are learning that, they really do have to check, is that website that they're shopping at .ie, or is it .fr, or .eu, or is it .co.uk? Am I going to have to pay VAT and duty if I buy this down the line, or if I am going to pay VAT and duty, am I, paying for it at the basket rather than, having to get a notice from DPD that there's VAT duty due on those goods. So I think the consumers have gotten a lot savvier. I think Christmas this year probably threw a lot of consumers because, we would get queries about gifts that were coming to them. And, if it was over a certain value, they were shocked that they would have to pay VAT on things. I think, customers have they've had to adapt very quickly, much like, exporters and Irish exporters have had to adapt very quickly as well. And I think it's just, they're getting used to it, but it's been definitely a challenge. Simon, I agree with you. I think somewhere around mid-February, it started to feel less horrible every day. And now it's, you know, we've gotten to the point where it's absolutely manageable. But for us, you know, data is the key. So if those customers don't know, as you say, Simon, where to, we put the numbers in the correct box for them, but if they don't give us the correct information, it really does impact for the consumer at the end, because they're wondering where their parcels are.
Okay, thanks. Jamie, I mean, as somebody involved in manufacturing, you know, the consumer, dog foods, pet food, treats, all that, you deal with the multiples, you know, both in Ireland and in France, you know, and across Europe. You know, what change have you seen?
What we've seen, I echo what the guys say about the turmoil at the beginning of last year in terms of logistics and getting our products out to our own customers, not necessarily the end consumer. Any of our bigger customers, it was easier because the level of preparation was a lot better. But we would have had a lot of, say, smaller UK customers that have kind of gone by the wayside now. They just weren't prepared for it. They weren't prepared for the costs of it. And the cost of doing business outside of England or the UK has become prohibitive. Going in to our European customers, the easiest solution for us now is going direct through France. We're completely avoiding the land bridge wherever possible. It's just not worth the hassle. So we're trying to go as direct to Europe as much as we can. From a sourcing point of view, that's echoed as well. If I have an option to buy a product out of France or Germany, as opposed to the UK, where I may have bought it before, it's more desirable because you just have so much less administration. I suppose the biggest effect on our end customers, particularly UK customers, is cost. You know, all of this stuff has added layers and layers of work onto every order that has to be done. We're getting better at it as we go. Our preparation was fairly good, I think, and we've automated an awful lot of our processes. But when you're getting into getting so systematic with everything, you're probably limiting the people you can work with in terms of logistics suppliers, in terms of customers. So we found ourselves consolidating with transporters as opposed to before, shopping around a lot more, because you need to have your system in place to let all the paperwork flow through. So that cost obviously has to be passed on. Some of our customers then obviously will pass it on to the end consumer. So that's probably been the biggest impact, I would say, of Brexit on people is, and everyone can see it. I know it's probably been muddied a bit over the last couple of years because of COVID messing with supply chains as well, driving costs. But I think in the next year or two, it'll manifest itself very clearly what the cost of Brexit has been on the finished good. And I think that's the biggest impact probably on the customer.
Thanks, David. Thanks for that. So it's interesting. I mean, as you say, these costs will flow down, you know, especially in the business you're in as well. You know, it's margins are low, so that, you know, you have to recover that every time.
Yeah.
Simon, as someone who was right at the heart of Brexit with the Irish exporter members and dealing with both governments, what impact has Brexit had on the consumer for simple things like travel and, you know, things like that? What have you seen? What have you heard in the market?
From a travel point of view, it's hard to say because Brexit and COVID have coalesced in terms of travel. So who knows? I guess we're only going to really see, we're only going to see who's going where from a consumer point of view. I don't think, I'm planning a trip to London in the next few weeks. I'm really looking forward to going over there. I have a lot of friends over there. I lived over there for quite a long time, actually back in the 90s. So it won't change my plans from a consumer travel point of view in any way, shape or form. It's still a huge country with a lot of interesting things to go and visit and go and see. I think from a business point of view, we are definitely doing more business with the UK from an export point of view. So our exports are up, was it 20% or so? Our exports are up a fair bit with the United Kingdom, with Great Britain, with Northern Ireland. And we're definitely not seeing anybody going, we're going to do less business with the UK. I don't know, but I know what Jamie was saying in terms of from a circumstance point of view, if they're not prepared for it on the other side. But very much there is a desire for Irish companies to continue to do business with the UK, and that's growing. and the next blot on the horizon is the the rules around agri-food produce that might go in, and whether they will lift that again or not. Britain has a shortage of food, so it'd be interesting to see where that one goes. There is just on that slide one. I mean, we are hearing. I'm Chris. You're probably and Jennifer know this more than us, but we are hearing from other people that the land bridge is taking somewhere between 12 and 20 hours more now to transit because of the it's taking 20 minutes to lift a GMO on it. So we are hearing that piece. So I think the land bridge is probably going to become even less viable going forward, which is difficult from a round trip freight point of view, I think. But my sense is that the providers are adjusting to that. That's my sense of it. We still definitely want to do more business with Britain, and we see our business growing with them.
Well, no, it's interesting to say that, because I know you talk about the land bridge, you talk about direct ferries. I mean, there's a lot more capacity coming on, even when we announce the next few weeks. So it looks like the ferry companies and the operators are actually going to put in more capacity on direct routes from Ireland to France in particular, which is good news. Jennifer, to yourself, we talked there with the consumer and the person you're delivering to. The impact on them. Obviously, there's people now doing more online shopping. DPD have been very, very busy. I mean, what real impact has it made on them? What difference have you seen? Have you seen any changes? And I know we spoke earlier on about the data and so forth. What have you changed? Any patterns? Any different patterns? They're buying different places? Are they buying different goods? Or what have you seen?
They're not necessarily buying goods, right? They're still, e-commerce, clothing, shoes, that kind of stuff is still primarily what we're seeing inbound from the UK. But we are absolutely seeing our volumes from the EU, from France. They've increased significantly since Brexit. So same with our exports out to the EU. Those volumes have increased. Again, that kind of goes back to the consumer being more savvy and saying, if I source it from Amazon in France, I don't have to worry about, the extra costs and things like that. So, I mean, certainly we have seen that impact, that the consumer has voted that, they'd rather buy goods, or they're certainly buying increasing goods from the EU. But, as Simon said, it is still the goods from the EU, and even our exports are still, predominantly our main volume from the international perspective. I think they're just getting more savvy about where they buy specific goods. I know maybe electronics, they're going to stay a little bit more in the UK, because of how you get a plug and things like that. But clothing and stuff, we also saw a lot of sort of, the Boohoo's, the ASOS's of the world, open distribution centers in France, in the Netherlands, in Germany, so that they could distribute from the EU without having to impact their customer, because I think they were absolutely afraid that those extra hurdles and delays might impact them.
It's interesting to say about the ASOS's and so forth. And one thing people always forget about while they're getting goods delivered to their door, there's a lot of returns as well, isn't there? And we see it in our business.
Absolutely. Returns are definitely a challenge.
Talk about the returns. What's the volume of return goods for the client now, or the person who gets an ASOS bag? Is a percentage here in Ireland we're fairly bad at it. It's something a third of all imports go back out again. What are you seeing in DPD?
Well, absolutely. Like, returns are huge. It's a huge problem for the UK customers because of having to get that data and re-export. What we found is a lot of those bigger retailers are sort of bulking out the returns. So you have a return address in, say, Ireland, or a return address in the EU, and then they'll go and they'll consolidate them all and send them back to, if the address is in the UK, they'll do that. Because it's a nightmare to have to do that for the consumer, to try and they have to then know all the customs information. So returns are definitely a challenge for those e-tailers. Challenge for us, it's a challenge for everybody. And I think customers have gotten when they're buying from the UK, we find them they're getting a bit more savvy about how to do that and how the return process works because of the customs element now.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good, thanks. Jamie, from your perspective, again, in the business that you're in, the products that you produce, has the cost increased, for the consumer now? Has it flowed down to the consumer because, changes?
Yeah, it has. Say over the last year now, we've probably had to review our prices with our customers 3 or 4 times already now. That's not all Brexit. Obviously, COVID has brought its issues in terms of supply chain and commodity prices and the rest of it. But in terms of Brexit, I'd say, yeah, logistics costs, just generally the cost of doing business in the UK has increased. Whether it be you talked about returns there on direct to consumer goods. If we have an issue now, you also mentioned before, Simon mentioned about agricultural food. So all of our products are derived from meat, basically. So they are considered product of animal origin. So anything we have a couple of facilities in the UK as well. So anything we're bringing from England now has to have a health certificate to get into the EU. Now, thankfully, we had experience in it because we're already dealing with China and the USA. So that's all been in place. But a lot of other manufacturers, this is brand new to them. That's due to come into effect going the other way later in the year. Our issue, say, when you talk about returns, if we're sending a full load of dog food into a UK customer and there's any sort of an issue with it, a few pallets have moved or there's something they don't like when they get to the bay, we don't really have a way to bring it back to Ireland because it has to get certified again by a vet over there before it can travel back across the border. So we've had to build in contingencies into our own facilities there to handle those sort of issues, which again brings overhead and cost as you go along. So all of that is kind of dripping onto the cost of the goods as we go along. And eventually it makes its way to the consumer, not immediately, but it does get there in the end. So yeah, what we've also done, we're probably more looking at our facilities here in Ireland, we're more looking towards the EU for customers or across the way to the States. We have facilities in the UK and we're pretty much trying to concentrate them on producing for the UK. It's becoming very insular over there. It's all happening within the island if it can at all. So when you're changing your pattern to do things that not necessarily you would have wanted to do a few years ago, it does bring cost and complexity, and that ultimately finds its way to the consumer.
And Simon, from the Irish Export Association members, what are you hearing as well? Have they seen increase in costs and so forth? Obviously we know customs is a cost to everybody now. There's VAT and duty on some products, but have they seen raw material increase, which has to be passed on?
Yeah, again, Chris, the global kind of supply chain issues have landed at the same time as Brexit as well, or maybe just slightly afterwards. And it must be, the kind of closures of certain ports and that in China over the last few weeks would concern me that in maybe 3 months' time, are we going to see another kind of spike or shock to the supply chain shortage? So I think it'll be a while, before we can really say that that's cost increases because of Brexit and that cost is because of COVID. But undoubtedly, doing business with Britain is much more expensive than it was in the past. And I think the companies that have been forced to look to other markets, so a company was telling me the other day that they used to buy a semi-manufactured metal product from the UK, and they fitted that to an item that they were making, but had to do the kind of whole sub-assembly piece themselves. They were forced to look elsewhere, and they looked to Germany, and they're now bringing that part in from Germany, but they don't have to do the sub-assembly. They're able to get the whole piece. And yes, it's more expensive than bringing it in from Britain, but the quality is way higher, and they're much more prepared to to take the cost. So definitely Brexit is costing business in terms of personnel that they've had to hire, all of the customs stuff that needs to be done. And I think just around certainty of being able to buy it's more on the import side than it is on the export side that the problems are. So it's definitely more expensive. I mean, from our point of view, I mean, Brexit has been it's created a huge amount of busyness within the organization, and because we had developed all these training courses a few years ago before Brexit happened, there's been huge demand for that service. And for us, we've been a key part of, you mentioned in my tome at the start of it, the different groups that we sit on. We're on 18 of them. So we're very much part of the infrastructure that's been feeding into government and backwards as well in trying to help companies. And I think, we're fortunate as a small country that we can have a very united point of view on something and come together very quickly on things to go and make things happen. So it's been very busy for us, in as much as it has been for our members. But we were in a good place to be able to help companies.
Well, it's interesting you talk about supply chains and what's going to happen to consumer and impact. And you see the shelves, shelves being empty in supermarkets. You see, people struggling to get parts and components. But while Irish business is very busy, what we're seeing, what we're being told, is the components is the biggest problem out there, that the end manufacturer doesn't have the components, and that feeds into what you're saying. And that has an impact on the end buyer who's buying that, part, or is getting that apple in the shop, or an orange or bananas. All that has squeezed and is getting tighter and tighter.
And Chris, that's getting quite critical now at this point. We are reaching a point with some businesses, and I don't publicly say this, but I mean, some businesses are saying to us that it's getting very critical for certain lines that they're producing, being able to, and it's not just the component parts. One of the issues is the spare part for the machine that's making the thing, that if they can't even get that, then the whole thing. So I actually think that we're not very far away from seeing places having to shut certain lines for certain times. You have massive hoarding going on so people, because of the container shortage at the moment, are going, I'm just going to buy whatever I can from wherever I can and store it. So there's a massive demand for storage, warehousing at the moment, because companies need to put stuff aside, and all of which is kind of strategically planning, not to shut the lines down. And I would be very concerned, and certainly one of the messages we give to government is, you got to watch out for jobs here on this, because the last thing we really want to see is that, because of our peripheral geographic position, what does that mean for the whole, now I do think this will sort itself out, but it could take up to another 18 months to sort itself out. But I do think we're at an acute point at the moment, and getting towards an even finer point over the next few months. Okay,
thanks. Jen, I mean, the online shopping, it's morphed, it's took off, and we see now the online coming directly from France, and we're shipping product from Spain into Cherbourg and into Ireland, and the volumes are massive. What kind of scale or increase have you seen in online shopping and for the consumer? How much has it grown?
Well, for our business, obviously the pandemic is where it all started, and Brexit, we thought it might have a bigger impact than it has. I mean, any reduction of purchasing from the UK has been offset by either people buying more in Ireland, buying within the island of Ireland, or buying from Europe. So I suppose the pandemic was the driver for everything, and now it's become so everybody does it. It's so easy, so they're used to it. But again, I don't think that Brexit had a huge impact. It would have had an impact, I think, obviously on UK suppliers and things like that, but we've seen our volumes, if it's been decreased at all from the UK, offset by domestic volumes going up and by European volumes as well.
Okay. Jamie, do you have an online presence at all, or is it all?
We don't sell directly from ourselves online, but obviously all of our customers have an online arm, and kind of what we've seen. And I don't know again if it's Brexit or COVID, but like the online thing has boomed with our customers. And what we've seen is that the the profile of product they're buying off us has changed. They're going for much larger packs, bulk packs, bigger ones. People, if they're buying the stuff online, they don't want to have to do it every second day. They want to do it and forget about it for 3 or 4 weeks. So they'll buy a much bigger pack, particularly when they don't have to lug it from the shop themselves to the house. Yeah. So that's what we've mainly seen about the online thing, where people, we would have sold a supermarket a 100-gram pack of dog treats. They're now buying a 1 kilogram pack of dog treats for their online store, which is great. It's bigger volume. It's more economical to produce, which offsets some of the problems we've had in terms of cost increases. But that's probably what I've seen as the main change in the online thing for us. Now, it's also made us, the amount of emails we get every week for people asking, can they buy direct from us, has gone through the roof in the last year. So it's making us reevaluate, should we be selling direct to the customer? And we've had a few talks about it, and probably watch this space. We'll have to dip our toe at some point.
That's interesting. What you were saying then is, I know you're really, your client is the, you know, the multiples. That's what you've all dealt with. But now, because it's a COVID thing or a Brexit thing, possibly a bit of Brexit, but both really, you're looking at maybe the online as being an opportunity for Irish dog foods. Yeah, absolutely. Now, we're mainly known as a private label producer. We would produce for the multiples in their own brand. We have a few brands of our own, but we've never really actively marketed them. But again, because of the changing landscape out there, people buying direct, people buying online, that's making us rethink that maybe we need to get more into that space. Okay, good. Simon, do you think after the upheaval of January 2021, do you think the consumer and, you know, the Irish businesses, you know, has accepted Brexit now and, you know, they're better placed because of it, or do you think we're still struggling with it?
Yeah, I think because there had been, like, I'm sitting on government stuff since 2015 in relation to this, and I think we had a very concerted kind of public messaging around Brexit for a long time heading into it. So I think, you know, we have a very smart consumer, and because Britain is such an important market for us, and because of the shared media space, and like, it is a very unique relationship between the two countries, which, you know, it can be difficult to understand because it's a kind of I always kind of think of it, it's a bigger sibling, smaller sibling type of relationship, but it is a very kind of close relationship. So I do think that the public and the business people were well aware of what was going on in relation to Brexit. And I think that, you know, a lot of big business was ready for the changes when they came. But it was surprising, actually, the amount of smaller businesses that weren't ready and were only beginning to kind of get things started this time last year. Has it made us look further afield? Are we better off because of it? I think that, you know, to be able to trade into other third markets around the world, having to have prepared for Brexit means that you're now ready for a lot of the paperwork that goes with that. As I said earlier on, I'm disappointed that we don't do more business with the EU. I think that's a huge opportunity there that we're missing out on. And it's possibly because of our over familiarity with doing business with the UK and with the United States. I mean, we have certain members that they just concentrate on that English language channel. So they go UK, US, Canada, then Australia, New Zealand. Whereas we have this massive market on our doorstep where we just don't have that level of familiarity, you know. And I think that the familiarity is that we have family, you know, we're used to talking to people. There's a huge history going back of that kind of very close personal kind of ties to those countries, and it's probably, and language has to be an issue in relation to it as well. But because we're more familiar with those markets, I think it's, you know, we really need to get our act together as a country to do more business with the EU. It's very, very disappointing, you know.
It's interesting to say that, you know, because we are all very comfortable dealing with the UK for a number of years. I suppose, Jen, to ask you the question, you know, has the Irish consumer now, have you seen it now, they've started buying more and more products in Europe, that they're more comfortable now dealing with kind of, you know, you know, the Frances, the Spains, and the Benelux countries. Have you seen an uplift with the consumer buying products in these countries? Because obviously they're avoiding VAT and duties. Okay, they might know the actual company, not quite sure where they're based, but have you seen an increase yourself?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think a lot of European websites and businesses, I think we're more prepared than the general UK consumer and business, because I think, much to Simon's point, right, the Irish government, the EU governments did a lot of preparing businesses and consumers for Brexit, you know, and I think what a lot of businesses are doing in Europe now is, you know, you might go to a website and language may be a barrier, it might be in Spanish or French, but you know, there's a translation button so that they know they're making it easier, I think, to be able to shop online in the EU. And I do think the consumers are, you know, it's not necessarily the first place they go, but maybe, you know, once they go and they realize that there's duties and VAT or import processes, you know, they go, well, maybe I can get this in France, or maybe I can get this in Spain, or something similar, or maybe I can get it in Ireland, you know, or in the north or something. So I do absolutely think that, you know, they're making those choices to at least try and find something outside of just the UK. I think you're right, Simon, that, you know, the fact that we now have to jump through these hurdles for customs processes has made it a little bit easier for Irish business to try and expand, not just in the EU, but, you know, wider afield for that. But I definitely do see, you know, our customers, their volumes are increasing into France and all of that. So they are actively trying to court new customers, not outside of just UK, where they wouldn't have necessarily thought about it maybe before, you know, January 2021. But I do think, you know, your question there was, has the consumer accepted Brexit? I think they have, only because they've had to, you know. I don't think anybody would have, if we had our druthers, I don't think the UK would have left. You know, anybody on this call would have wanted the UK to stay. But anyway, so I think they've made that choice because they've had to. You know, there's no choice. It's either you do it and you live with it, or, you know, you just don't shop in the UK at all and you go somewhere further afield.
No, it's interesting because we look back at last year and we saw the problems with Brexit, and 100% I agree with you. A lot of companies were not prepared, were not ready for it, and that trickled down to the consumer. Didn't realise all of a sudden, if I'm buying this product from the UK, I might end up paying VAT and duty on it. And you know, that was a surprise to all of us, because we all knew that was coming, but the consumer didn't know that. I think they're trying to adjust to that at the moment, and they are.
Absolutely.
Where they're now looking at, where is that domain? Where am I now buying that product from? I want to avoid paying, you know, duties and VAT and so forth on it. So it's going to be interesting going forward as to, you know, will the consumer switch now to the Frances, the Belgians, the Hollands, all these Spains? I mean, as I said to you, Spain, there's a lot of online product coming in from Spain, particularly the big clothing companies are all importing to Spain at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. Like Amazon, we're seeing a massive increase in Amazon from France and Amazon from Germany. So I think, you know, because there is no English barrier, there's no language barrier when you're buying from Amazon, you know, but you can actively choose where you're shopping from. The consumer is absolutely doing that. And you're right about the domain. You know, they never checked it before. And I think even in probably Q1, it never occurred to them, where's this website based, or doing the research has to be done to find out, will I have to pay for something down the line? There's a lot of work that the consumer has to do now that they didn't have to do, you know, in 2020 or before that. And you know, there's a lot of onerousness on the consumer now to have to do that. And it's not, you know, it is the reality of the world, but it does make everything harder for the consumer.
Jamie, you know, the consumer trends that we just spoke about there, the change in the, you know, where they buy from. Do you think that those consumer trends could you know, lead to increased business with France, for instance? I mean, what's your thoughts on that? I know you import product from France, and you know, you bought raw material and you buy product. What's your thinking on that? Do you think there is an opportunity for Ireland, our nearest neighbour, you know,
Absolutely. I'd say, like the guys have said, the consumer's getting more wary about where the products are coming from. And if it's going to be less onerous to get it from a France or a Spain or a Germany, they'll know that and they'll do their research. And if they can buy it from there, they'll buy it from there. Equally, what I would say, even say to European producers and manufacturers, the experience they've had in dealing with the UK now since Brexit should probably embolden them to look further afield as well. It's the same process to go to the States or to go to the Far East to do all that work. You already have the systems in place now if you're dealing with the UK. So any fear factor you might have had about going further afield should be kind of gone. You know, there's opportunities everywhere once you have the systems in place. We were fortunate enough in that we were already dealing with the States, with the Far East, with South Africa, places like that. And we've the added complexity of the health certification in our product. So we've been through it over the years. So Brexit wasn't a huge step for us, more so just ramping up our capacity to do that kind of work and bringing on more brokers and people like that. But I think everyone can take the experience of it and make good of it. You know, you can either, if you've overcome dealing with the UK now and you know how to get in there, get your product into the customers, get it to the consumers, you can pretty much sell it anywhere once you get your costs right. From the consumer side, like the guys mentioned, they're much more savvy. They're navigating the websites. They're figuring out where the product is actually coming from. Will they or won't they have extra charges? What I would say to anybody, say running a French online business or anything like that, I'd be singing loud about the fact that your product is going directly from Europe to Europe. You will not have any problems if we're selling to you and you're based in Ireland. And I think what I've seen in my personal thing, if you're doing the online shopping, sometimes that's not very clear. You're delving through terms and conditions and trying to figure out where the warehouse addresses are. And you've even had the experience where it could be a French or a Spanish company you're dealing with, but then they decide to send it through the UK anyway to get to you, and it gets bogged down along the way, you know. So I think if everyone takes the learnings from what's happened with Brexit, they can turn it into a ladder instead of a pit. You know, you can definitely grow out of it.
Thanks, Dave. Simon, no, you know probably the best answer on this one because you're right at the heart of it. So what changes for the consumer do you expect when the UK implements full customs checks sometime this year, maybe this year? We'll have to wait and see. What's your thoughts on that?
Chris, can I give a short answer to that one? Because I think there's very few from the consumer point of view, because they're largely buying stuff from the UK, and all of those changes are already implemented. For businesses going in there, obviously there's an extra layer of paperwork that companies like Jamie's would have to do when they go through it. And, you know, I've no doubt Queally Group is way up to speed in what needs to be done, but we are seeing now a growing demand for our training courses in how do you deal with this next set of paperwork going through. Can I just come back and talk about the France piece, because if that's okay, because
absolutely,
I do think there's a massive opportunity, and I know, and I'm not, you know, the embassy, the French embassy used to have, is it your closest neighbor in France was right across the front of the building, and it's the new catchword for the French embassy in Ireland. I think I see a massive opportunity for France to move into some of the space that the Brexit thing has caused with the UK leaving. But what we're seeing with businesses is that they're beginning to do more business with Germany proportionately than they are doing with France. And it should be France because we have the direct transport links. And you know, most of us in school learned French as the first foreign language that we learned rather than German or Spanish. So there is some kind of level of affinity with France as we grew up. So from my experience in the role that I was in beforehand is that it takes an awful lot more than, so the consumer and online buying is one thing, but how do we get that stickiness, that gluiness of the relationship that we have with the UK, and to be honest, we probably always will have with the UK, because we've cousins, brothers, sisters, everything kind of living over there, and them here. So I think at a policy level, at a higher level, I think the government and the embassies play a very, very key role in all of this. you know, they really need to engage with the business community in each of the countries at a massive ongoing level to create that level of familiarity, you know. So there's, I can see the hardcore of companies that are in the French Irish Chamber who are on the call this morning, but how do you get that bigger? And you know, when I worked in the role I had before this, we just had event after event after event, dinners, everything. I mean, you just got that community together, and that community then owns that space, and they start, you know, they become much more familiar with what it's like to do business, and all of the unknowns start breaking down, and then other people, they invite other people in. So I actually think at the top level we have a failure here, because we should be doing an awful lot more of that, and I mean both countries. And for France needs to realize that, you know, we do an enormous amount of business still with the UK, and there is a pretty big market slice to be got in this country, and they should be going after it. And why aren't they? Because I don't see that happening, if I'm being honest. And I'm not trying to cause upset, but I'm very familiar with how this is done on a country to country basis, and I don't see it happening at the level that I would have seen it before.
You know, it's interesting. I mean, we had a discussion before we started. We're talking to Jamie about dealing in France, and yeah, 100% I agree with you. To get into France and deal in France, you have to build a relationship over a number of years. And when you get to a point, then it's like, as you said, you're like brothers and sisters. It's very, there's a trust there, there's a loyalty there. But I think if Irish companies, you know, do push into France and import and export from France, and they, you know, and they stick with it. I think that's the problem. Sometimes companies don't stick with it. You know, we're 21 years in France now. We look at the volumes in Ireland, France on the trailer business going back to 2019. I think shipments were at 35,000 loads a year. This year they're going to be north of 120,000. It's, you know, it's multiplied. So there's an opportunity there definitely for Irish companies and the Irish consumer to buy from France and to sell to France as well. No, I agree with you wholeheartedly with that. So Jen, your side of it, the French thing as well. Do you have a lot of business coming in from France? Do you have much business coming in?
Yeah, I mean, it's not massive, but it is certainly increasing from where it was, you know, in say pre-Brexit. But we do see people, you know, definitely trying to increase the volume coming in from France. But it's not. It's definitely increased, but it's not, you know, massive. There's definitely room for growth there from the online perspective. Absolutely.
I'm just looking at some of the questions here on the chat. I'm just going to try it to you, Jamie. Has the Irish government done enough, do you think, you know, with Brexit for the consumer? Or do you think it's helped businesses and the consumer enough?
It's difficult to say. We don't rely too much on the Irish government in our own business to dig us out. I know there's been an awful lot of the, you know, training courses and trying to educate people around Brexit and all the rest of it, which is all well and good. When you get into the thick of it, you learn very quickly how it all operates. I think the Irish government has done a reasonable job in diplomatically staying in a reasonably safe space with the UK compared to maybe some of the other European countries. They'll always be one of our biggest trading partners, whether they're in or out of Europe. So we need to keep a good relationship going with them. I know there's been some fractious moments over the last few years with all the negotiations and everything, and the government have probably stood firm where they've needed to. But certainly for us, the UK are still going to be one of our biggest markets. And it's key that the relationship stays reasonably good there. As things come along this year now, like the big part for us now will be these next set of checks to come in on the agricultural products going into Great Britain, whether or not that happens. You know, if we could do anything to avoid that, that's mainly what we'd be lobbying government about now is to make it as seamless as possible to get into that market. Even though the roadblock has probably been put up on the other route coming from the UK out on a European-wide level. I have a feeling the UK will want to keep their market as open as they can, or they're going to be in supply problems because they are heavily reliant on the rest of Europe and the rest of the world to supply them. with regards to government supports, I don't know is my honest answer. We haven't gotten a lot ourselves. We haven't looked for a lot, but it's more keeping the relationship running and keeping the information flowing between the different parties.
Simon, I'll ask you one of the questions here. Where do you see direct transport links between Ireland and France going over the next few years? I know we've seen it, particularly in our business, but what are you hearing, or what are you seeing? Do you think it's going to be more and more direct, routes to Europe, bypassing the UK, going back to the whole, what you were saying a few minutes ago, transit in the UK is starting to drop off because the delays down in Dover and Calais?
I think there will be, and I think the other part of that question is how quickly can the market respond to something like that. I think if we go back to the end of 2020, when there was, there was a report out saying that the market will provide, and the routes, and there was certain skepticism amongst the rest of us that unless this was actually pushed forward, with welcoming arms, particularly by government, actually it was the wrong. For me, the wrong mood music was being made, but the market did respond extremely quickly, and a couple of enterprising people, opened those new routes. So I don't see, if the demand is there, I don't see any reason why there wouldn't be increased routing on that. And I suppose it's kind of demand and supply, isn't it? So it's if what we're all saying, that if we start doing more business with the European Union, and this talk is largely around consumer business, and very clearly, because in my own household we're doing it, where I was looking to get something in the other day, again another part of this old banger I have, and my daughter said to me, "We'll go on to was it ebay.fr or whatever it was one of the other, not the UK website." So clearly the consumer will start bringing more goods in from the continent, and we're smart enough to realize that we need to bypass the UK. I think the business side of it, from an export piece, needs a lot more support to make that happen in a meaningful way, and from an import side. But I do think if the demand for the routes are there, they will be provided, and quickly.
We're just up on 11 o'clock there. I think we're bang on time there, Fiona. Which it was. I think we can leave it. That was a very interesting conversation. It was great to get all your opinions and ideas on what's happening. And gave us some great insight as well into what's going on out there with the consumer and the effects of Brexit on them. Hopefully going forward, we'll be better placed to deal with the next stage of Brexit, wherever that's going to be. So, Jamie, thank you very much. Simon, thank you very much. And Jennifer, thank you very much. And Fiona, I'll hand back to you.
Thanks, Chris.
Cheers.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Chris, and for this extremely interesting discussion on the impact of Brexit on the consumer. I really appreciate you all joining us today, and all the participants. We had over 80 people registered today, and I see we've had up to nearly 60 people join us, so that is great. We will continue with some webinars, but also we do look forward to welcoming our members to in-person events very soon, and we will be coming back to you with information on that. Just to highlight that with the French Embassy, we work very close with the French Embassy and with France Team Ireland, which includes the ambassador and his team, Business France, and French Tech Dublin, and the French advisors in Ireland. And we are partnering with the French Embassy on the 7th of March to celebrate women in business. And that will be with our own president, Margot Slattery, and Noel from the European Movement Ireland, and also Dervin MacDonald will be our moderator, and we have other speakers joining us, including one of our French advisors. So that's the next webinar up, and we'll be in touch very soon with our members to let you know about the next in-person event to get you all together after 2 years of waiting to see you all. So thank you very much. Bonne journée, merci beaucoup, et j'espère que nous allons voir beaucoup de business entre les deux pays très prochaine. Merci beaucoup, and Chris, thank you for moderating, very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.